I'll never forget the morning I opened my front door and felt like my entire life had been stolen from me. The sun was barely rising, the dew still clinging to the grass, and yet there it stood, a tall wooden fence stretching across the dirt. Road that had been my driveway for generations. My driveway, my land, sealed off like I was some kind of intruder. I stood there barefoot, the gravel biting into my feet, staring at the boards that blocked the view of my own pastures. For a moment I thought maybe I was still dreaming, but then I saw the sign nailed right in the middle. Private access, HOA property. That's when my stomach dropped. See, my ranch wasn't some new plot of land I'd just picked up. It had been in my family since my grandfather broke ground on it 60 years ago. Every fence post, every patch of wildflowers, every inch of soil, it was ours. My father taught me to ride on these fields. My mother taught me to cook in the little farmhouse kitchen that still smelled of cedar and coffee. This place wasn't just where I lived. It was who I was. And now? It looked like a prison. I knew exactly who was behind it. The Homeowners Association. The HOA had been creeping closer for years, swallowing up every acre of open land with their cookie-cutter houses and fake smiles. I'd resisted their offers, their pressure, even their threats. My ranch didn't belong to them. I never signed their paperwork. I never agreed to their rules. But to them, that didn't matter. To them, I was a blemish, a reminder that not everyone bowed down to their so-called community standards. The fence was their way of showing me who they thought was in charge. I stormed down the path, my dog, Bandit, trailing behind me, barking at the wooden wall like he knew it was the enemy. When I reached the gate, I pulled hard, but it wouldn't budge. They'd locked it with a heavy padlock, my own land locked from me. My throat burned with anger. I wasn't alone on that road for long. Soon, a black SUV rolled up from the other side. Inside was Marjorie Grant, HOA's Queen Bee, their president and, in her mind, the ruler of the world. She rolled down her tinted window with the kind of slow confidence that told me she'd been waiting for this moment. "Morning," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Looks like you're not too happy with our improvements." "Improvements?" I snapped. "You blocked off my driveway." She tilted her head, lips curling into a smirk. "Your driveway? Mr. Carter, this road runs right through our community now. It's technically shared property. The board voted to close it off. For safety. Too much traffic. Too many unsightly trucks." I clenched my fists. She meant my feed trucks, the ones that delivered hay and grain for my horses. To her, they weren't just trucks. They were symbols that my ranch didn't fit the perfect image she wanted to sell to her neighbors. "This land has been mine since before you built a single house here," I told her, my voice shaking with fury. "You don't get to lock me out of it." Marjorie's smile widened like she enjoyed watching me boil. "You can always use the alternate route. It's a little longer, but it'll keep things orderly." Then she rolled up her window and drove off, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my blood hot in my veins. That so-called alternate route was nearly 20 miles out of the way, winding through back roads that turned to mud every time it rained. They knew it. That's why they did this. They wanted to make my life harder, to break me until I sold the ranch and got out of their picture-perfect neighborhood. But I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window at the glow of the streetlights they'd installed along their pristine sidewalks. My land looked darker now, like it was shrinking under their shadow. I poured myself a cup of coffee even though it was late. I needed the bitterness to keep me awake, to keep me from losing myself in despair. Memories kept flashing through my mind. My father mending fences in the blazing heat, my mother planting marigolds along the porch, my grandfather sitting on the porch swing telling me stories about how he fought tooth and nail to keep this land in our family. He always said, "Son, never let anyone build a wall around you. If they try, find a way to tear it down." But as I looked at that padlocked gate, I realized something even deeper. This wasn't just about tearing down walls. This was about showing them that you can't box in a man who knows his worth. The fence wasn't just the beginning of a fight. It was the start of a war. And though I didn't know exactly how yet, I swore that night I would make the HOA regret, the day they drove those posts into my land. Because if they thought a fence could stop me, they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. The next evening, I walked into the HOA meeting hall with my boots still caked in mud and my temper sharp enough to cut glass. I wasn't invited, of course. They never invited me. But I pushed open those double doors anyway, and every head in the room turned as if I'd dragged dirt across their clean carpet. Maybe I had. The room smelled of perfume and fresh paper. Rows of neatly dressed neighbors sat on folding chairs, whispering behind manicured hands. At the front sat the board, with Marjorie perched in the center like a queen on her throne. She didn't flinch when she saw me. In fact, her smirk grew wider, like she had been waiting for me to storm in. I didn't bother sitting down. I planted myself in the aisle and let my voice ring through the hall. "You had no right to build that fence," I said. "That road is mine. My family built it. My grandfather graded it with his own hands before half of you were even born." A ripple of whispers spread across the crowd, but Marjorie raised her hand for silence. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, "this is a community meeting. You are not a member of this community." I took a step closer, my boots thudding against the floor. "You've surrounded me with your houses. You've put your rules on my land. Don't tell me I'm not part of this community when you've made sure I can't escape it." A man in a blue blazer, one of the board members, cleared his throat. The vote was unanimous. The road needed to be closed for the safety of the neighborhood. Too much traffic, too many disruptions. I knew what he meant by disruptions. My delivery trucks, the horse trailers, the signs that my life didn't fit their polished world. "You've cut me off from my own property," I said, my voice rising. "You've turned my driveway into a wall. Do you have any idea what that means for me, for my animals, for my business?" A woman in the front row, holding a designer purse, muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "Maybe he should just sell and move." The words burned hotter than any flame. That's what they wanted. They wanted me gone. My land wasn't valuable to them because of what it was. It was valuable because it stood in their way. I looked directly at Marjorie. "You're playing with fire. That road is mine, and I'll prove it. I've got the deeds. I've got the maps. You can build all the fences you want, but you can't erase the truth." Her eyes glittered like cold glass. "Mr. Carter, perhaps you should consult your lawyer, because from where we're sitting, you're outnumbered." Laughter rippled from a few of the board members. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control here would only feed their story, that I was some stubborn old rancher standing in the way of progress. I turned on my heel and walked out, but not before tossing one last sentence over my shoulder. "You'll regret this. Every last one of you." The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. Bandit was waiting in the truck, his head hanging out the window as if even he could sense my rage. I climbed in and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. On the drive home, the long detour route they'd forced me to take twisted like a knife in my gut. 20 extra miles of dark, uneven road. Every bump reminded me of their smug faces, their laughter, their certainty that they'd beaten me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking with anger. The fence loomed ahead of me in the headlights, its boards casting jagged shadows across the dirt. I killed the engine and sat there in silence, staring at it. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was a declaration of war. Inside the house, I tried to calm myself, but the anger wouldn't let go. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, the same table my father once sat at when he planned out cattle sales and harvest schedules. The chair across from me was empty, but I could almost see him there, leaning back with that steady gaze of his. "What would you do, Dad?" I muttered. "Would you fight? Or would you walk away?" I already knew the answer. He'd fought for every acre. He'd fought through droughts, debts, and storms that nearly wiped us out. Walking away wasn't in our blood. The more I thought about it, the more the fury shifted into something else. Resolve. They thought they could lock me out, push me aside, laugh at me until I broke. But they didn't understand the kind of man I was. I wasn't going to break. I leaned forward, pressing my palms flat against the wood grain of the table. My grandfather's words came back to me, words he'd repeated every time life threw a wall in his way. If someone builds a fence around you, don't waste your time begging for the key. Build your own way through. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every howl of the coyotes in the distance, only carved the decision deeper into my heart. The HOA thought they had trapped me, but all they had done was show me exactly where their weakness lay, and I intended to use it. The days after that meeting felt heavier than ever. Every morning I woke to the sight of that fence, the way it sliced across my land like a permanent scar. It wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It had become personal. I could feel the HOAs, presence in every corner of my ranch, every path my boots had worn smooth over the years. They weren't just controlling a road, they were controlling me, my life, my very freedom. The first time it hit me for real, I was trying to get my feed delivered. My supplier pulled up to the fence, craning his neck to see if there was a way through. "Looks like I'm not supposed to come in," he muttered, tapping his truck's horn in frustration. I could feel my face flush with anger and embarrassment. My horses looked at me, ears pricked, sensing the tension. Even they understood that something was wrong. I tried calling Marjorie, the HOA president, to negotiate. I left polite messages, at first, hoping to appeal to reason, but the calls went unanswered or ended with a curt, "You'll have to follow the alternate route." After 3 days of that, the politeness burned off like ash in a fire. Then came the letters. Thick envelopes with raised letters from lawyers, demanding that I cease all obstruction and threatening fines that could ruin me. I opened one on the porch, my hands trembling. The words on the page weren't just cold, they were venomous. Immediate compliance is required. Continued resistance will result in daily penalties. Your property may be considered in violation of HOA regulations. I laughed bitterly, but the sound was hollow. They weren't just trying to fence me in. They were trying to crush me. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. "When someone pushes you, don't just push back. Make them think twice." It didn't take long for the local neighbors to notice. My friend Carla drove by one afternoon, her eyes wide as she saw me pacing by the gate. "You look like you're about to explode," she said, hopping out of her SUV. "What's happening with the fence?" I thought that thing was temporary. "Temporary?" I spat. "They've blocked me from my own property. My trucks can't get in. My guests can't come. Even my vet had to take a detour that nearly doubled the cost of his visit. This isn't temporary. It's a declaration of war." Carla frowned, glancing at the fence like she could see its malice. "Have you thought about fighting them legally?" I shook my head. "I don't want a court battle that drags on for years. I want them to feel what it's like to be on the other side, to realize the price of trying to control someone who won't bend." Over the next week, the pressure only grew. One morning, I found a small note slipped under my gate. It was typed, stiff, and full of veiled threats. "We're watching you. Don't think about retaliating. The HOA has eyes everywhere." That was when I realized how far this had gone. They weren't just trying to control me. They were obsessed with breaking me. Someone in that board, or maybe even Marjorie herself, had been monitoring my every move. Every step I took, every visitor I received, they wanted to know. But that obsession gave me an idea. Sitting on the porch that night, I stared at the lock on my gate and the wide road beyond it. A thought flickered in my mind, sharp as a knife. They had made a critical mistake. They'd boxed me in, yes, but they'd also funneled all their traffic through my land. Every car, every neighbor, every delivery, they had to pass my gate. Their arrogance, their need for control, had created an opportunity. I leaned back, letting the realization sink in. If I could turn that gate into something more than a blockade, if I could turn it into leverage, they'd have to pay attention. And maybe, just maybe, they'd learn the hard way that you don't corner someone without consequences. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept picturing Marjorie in her big house, thinking she had won, laughing at my supposed defeat. And I pictured myself, standing at that gate, turning the tables in a way that she could never anticipate. The next morning, I walked along the fence line, running my fingers over the rough wood. Every board felt heavier than the last, not just physically, but emotionally. This fence wasn't just wood. It was a symbol of everything I was fighting for, my history, my freedom, my pride. And I realized, with a clarity that cut through my exhaustion, that I wasn't going to wait for permission. Something had shifted in me. The anger had transformed into strategy. The humiliation had transformed into resolve. And deep down, I knew that whatever I decided to do next would change the balance of power forever. Because fences aren't just barriers, they're challenges. And I've never been one to back down from a challenge. That's when the first real spark of an idea hit me. A plan that would make them regret ever underestimating me. A way to turn their power against them without breaking the law. A way to reclaim my land and my pride on my terms. But it wasn't going to be simple. They were organized, aggressive, and ruthless. Every step I took from here on out would have to be precise, calculated, and bold. And the moment I started mapping it out in my head, I knew one thing for certain. They had no idea the storm they had unleashed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking the length of my porch, eyes fixed on the fence, trying to imagine a way out of the nightmare the HOA had created. Every shadow cast by the moon seemed heavier, almost alive, like the fence itself was daring me to challenge it. I felt trapped, humiliated, and furious. And yet beneath all that anger, a strange thought began to take shape. It started as a whisper in my mind. They're obsessed with controlling access. What if I used that against them? At first, I dismissed it. The thought felt reckless, almost insane. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Every single vehicle that wanted to pass through the neighborhood had to go past my gate. Delivery trucks, neighbors' cars, even guests, all funneled into this one narrow point. They had created a chokehold without realizing it, and that chokehold ran through my property. I poured myself another cup of coffee and walked down to the gate, running my hands over the rough wood. The padlock gleamed under the porch light. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the anger and humiliation drain into determination. My grandfather's words came back, sharp and vivid. When someone builds a fence around you, don't waste your time begging for the key. Build your own way through. And that was it. Not begging, not fighting through lawyers for years, not giving them the satisfaction of thinking they'd won. A way through. On my terms. I started sketching on a scrap of paper I found in the kitchen. A toll. A private gate where anyone who wanted to pass would have to pay. Nothing illegal, just a simple logical system. The road was my property. Legally, I could control who entered and who left. If they wanted access, they would pay. Every car, every truck, every delivery. My humiliation would become leverage. Their arrogance would become my advantage. I could feel my pulse quicken as I mapped it out. Each dollar would be a reminder that they couldn't push me around without consequences. Every car that passed would be a small victory. a quiet rebellion in the face of their control. I pictured Marjorie's face, stiff and red, watching as her precious neighborhood became a stream of reluctant payments. But just as the idea settled in my mind, something unexpected happened. I heard tires crunching against the gravel outside, the gate. My heart leapt. A car was coming, fast, too fast. I ran to the window, and to my horror, I saw a giant SUV stop at the gate. Through the tinted windows, I could see a man in a suit gesturing aggressively, and then Marjorie herself appeared. In the passenger seat smirking, they had come to confront me, to intimidate me, to show me that they still had control. I stepped outside, my hands empty, but my jaw set. "You're on my land," I said, my voice calm, but I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "You need my permission to pass." Marjorie's smirk faltered for the first time. This is our neighborhood. You can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," I interrupted, pointing at the padlock. "This gate sits on my property. Every car that comes through here now needs my approval, every person, every delivery, and you, Marjorie, are no exception." The man in the driver's seat slammed his hand on the wheel. "This is absurd. We'll take legal action." I shrugged, a calm smile spreading across my face. "Then you'll pay your lawyers. But for today, if you want to leave your house, you're going to have to wait." They looked at me like I had lost my mind, but I wasn't bluffing. I had spent hours confirming the legal details. I had spent hours imagining every scenario, and for the first time in weeks, I felt powerful instead of trapped. They didn't leave immediately. Instead, Marjorie leaned out the window, her smirk, gone, replaced by something sharper. Anger, disbelief, maybe even fear. "You think you can outsmart all of us?" she spat. I met her gaze steadily. "I don't think. I know." Then slowly, deliberately, I locked the gate behind me, the padlock clicking in the quiet night. The sound was a punctuation mark, loud and final. I could see the tension in their shoulders, the uncertainty in their eyes. That night, I walked back into the house with Bandit at my heels, my heart still racing, and I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I had crossed a line. Then, slowly, deliberately, I locked the gate behind me, the padlock clicking in the quiet night. The sound was a punctuation mark, loud and final. I could see the tension in their shoulders, the uncertainty in their eyes. That night, I walked back into the house with Bandit at my heels, my heart still racing, and I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I had crossed a line. This wasn't just about offense anymore. It wasn't about inconvenience or spite. This was a turning point. I had taken the first step from being a victim to being in control, and there was no going back. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that from this moment on, the HOA would fight back. They would escalate. They would try to intimidate, threaten, and corner me again. But I had seen the weakness in their arrogance. I had found the opportunity they had left me, and I intended to use it. I went to bed that night with a mix of dread and anticipation, knowing that tomorrow the first car would arrive at my gate and everything would change. My land, my rules, my terms. And for the first time since the fence went up, I felt like I had the upper hand. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, my mind buzzing with anticipation. The first car was due any minute. I didn't know which neighbor would be brave or foolish enough to come through the gate first. I paced the porch, Bandit at my side, ears twitching as if he could feel the tension in the air. I had spent the night double-checking my plan. Everything was legal. Everything was enforceable. The gate was my property, and under county law, I could control access. I had even prepared a simple payment system, a locked drop box, a sign clearly stating the toll, and my phone ready to record every transaction for transparency. I wanted to make a point without stepping outside the law. Then I heard it. Tires. Crunching on the gravel. My stomach clenched. The first car. It was a shiny black SUV, the same one Marjorie had driven the night before, but this time it was alone. I stepped up to the gate and waved. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice calm, though my pulse was hammering in my ears. "This is private property. Access requires a toll." The SUV stopped, and a young man in a crisp polo leaned over the wheel, his face twisted in confusion. "A toll? For driving? What is this?" "You heard me," I said, gesturing toward Day, the drop box. "Your vehicle cannot pass without payment. It's my land, and this is my rule. Simple as that." He blinked, clearly trying to process what I had just told him. I live here. I've lived here for years. You can't just—" "Watch me," I interrupted, holding my ground. "This gate sits on my property. Everything beyond it. You don't get to access unless you follow my terms. You can take the long route, or you can pay the toll. Your choice." He sat in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel, the engine ticking quietly. I could see his pride fighting with his practicality. He wanted to argue, to assert control, but the truth was inescapable. He had no choice. Finally, he opened his wallet, pulled out a few bills, and dropped them in the box. My heart raced, not just from the thrill, but from the realization that my plan was working. The SUV drove through, and I felt a rush of satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. The first domino had fallen. By mid-morning, cars began to line up, hesitant, frustrated, muttering under their breath. Some tried to argue, some tried to protest, and some even attempted to bypass the gate, only to be met with the clear line marking my property and the determined gaze of bandits standing guard. I felt a strange mix of vindication and unease. On one hand, I was finally reclaiming control of my life, turning the humiliation into leverage. On the other, the tension was thicker than ever. Every honk, every grumble, every glare was a reminder that I had just made myself a target. It wasn't long before I saw Marjorie's SUV pull up again. Her face was set in a tight, furious line, the kind of fury that comes from realizing the game has suddenly turned against you. She rolled down her window and glared at me. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "You can't do this. I run this neighborhood and you are—" "On my land," I interrupted. "Exactly. And this is my rule. If you want to pass, you pay the toll, otherwise take the long way." She pressed her hand to the horn, a sharp, aggressive sound that echoed across the quiet ranch. I didn't flinch. Bandit barked once, a warning, and she finally rolled up the window, muttering angrily as she drove off. The adrenaline surged through me. I had expected resistance, but not this level of disbelief and panic. This was working. They were losing. Control, one car, one toll at a time. But then came the unexpected twist. As the morning wore on, I noticed something strange. Some neighbors began whispering to each other, glancing at the gate and quietly leaving small notes with their payments. Some notes said, "Thank you for standing up to them," and others admitted, "I've wanted to do this for years, but didn't have the courage." The HOA had created a problem for themselves. By trying to control me, they had forced the neighborhood to confront their own frustrations. Every car through my gate was no longer just a transaction. It was a small act of rebellion. By noon, word had spread. People who had never spoken to me before were pulling up, dropping payments, and shaking their heads at the audacity of the system. I watched from the porch as the line of cars grew, realizing that the very thing meant to humiliate me was now giving me power. But with power came danger. A black SUV appeared at the end of the line, tinted windows hiding the driver. The car stopped abruptly, doors swinging open. Two men in suits stepped out, likely lawyers or enforcers sent by the HOA. They approached my gate with purpose, their expressions unreadable, and my heart sank. This was no longer a small-scale rebellion. They had escalated. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. One wrong move could turn this from a clever stand into a full-blown legal battle, or worse. I squared my shoulders, my palms pressed against the wood of the gate. This is still my property, I reminded myself. I know my rights. I know the law, and I will not be intimidated. As they neared, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about a toll or a fence, or even the HOA's arrogance. This was about claiming my life back, standing up for everything my family had built, and proving to everyone, including myself, that no one could corner me without consequences. And in that moment, as the men stopped just a few feet from the gate, I knew one thing for certain. The fight had only just begun. By the next morning, it was clear that my little experiment had turned into a full-blown crisis for the HOA. Cars lined the gravel like a river of headlights, each driver grumbling, under their breath as they handed over bills or coins. Some were hesitant, some angry, some secretly thrilled to watch the tables turn. And all of them were reminders that the power I had reclaimed was no longer just symbolic. It was real. I was standing by the gate when I saw the black SUVs approaching, their engines low and deliberate. Marjorie sat in the passenger seat of one, her usual smugness replaced by a scowl that could cut glass. Behind her, a cluster of men in crisp suits followed, each carrying briefcases and exuding authority like they owned the world. My pulse quickened, but I didn't flinch. "This is getting out of hand," Marjorie spat as the first SUV came to a halt. "We are going to make sure you regret this, Carter. Every action has consequences." I rested a hand on the gate. "So do your choices. Every car that passes this road now has to respect the law and my property. If that bothers you, take the long way around. Or find another solution." Her face twisted with disbelief. "You think a few tolls make a difference? You're insane." I just smiled, calm and unwavering. I had expected threats, but now I could see fear flickering in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there, the first crack in their armor. They didn't waste time. Within an hour, I began receiving letters thicker than any I had seen before, each stamped with legal threats, notices of fines, warnings of injunctions, threats to involve law enforcement, and then the letters stopped coming to my mailbox and started arriving in person. A lawyer showed up at my gate, tall, imposing, carrying a thick binder of what he called proof that I had no right to enforce access. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone flat as if reading from a script, "the HOA has made it very clear. You are in violation of several regulations. This gate, this toll must cease immediately." I leaned against the gate, letting Bandit sit quietly at my side. "I'm standing on my property," I said, my voice steady. "And my actions are within the law. You can call it a violation all you want, but it doesn't change the facts. You need my permission to pass." The lawyer's jaw tightened and he muttered something under his breath, storming back to his SUV. The tension in the air was thick, almost electric. I could feel the ripple of panic through the neighborhood. Word had clearly spread. Some neighbors looked anxious, others secretly pleased, but all eyes were on me, and I realized something. I had become the center of a storm I didn't just survive. I had created it. Then, the unthinkable happened. That same morning, a delivery truck approached, the gate carrying equipment for a local business. The driver didn't see the toll box at first, and by the time he did, he had already stopped. Panic flashed across his face. I stepped forward, explaining the rules calmly. He hesitated, nervous, and glanced back down the long, winding detour road. Finally, he dropped the payment into the box. As the coins clinked, a voice behind me gasped. I turned to see Marjorie standing at the edge of my property, her hands on her hips, fury written across every line of her face. "This is unacceptable," she screamed. "This will not stand." Took a deep breath, letting the calm wash over me. "It already stands. And it's going to stay until a legal authority tells me otherwise. Or until you learn that control isn't given. It's earned. She stepped closer, her face inches from mine. You can't humiliate me like this in front of the neighborhood. I'm not humiliating you, I said quietly. I'm enforcing my rights. Everything else is your own arrogance catching up to you. Marjorie's eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear. Not for herself, but for her control. I realized she had never dealt with someone who refused to bow down, someone who saw through the power she thought she wielded. Then, as if on cue, the line of cars behind her grew longer. The neighborhood had joined the rebellion in its own way, silently, one payment at a time. They weren't just helping me, they were proving to Marjorie and the board that their rules were meaningless if the people refused to follow them. I felt a surge of satisfaction, but I also knew the storm was far from over. This was the tipping point. The HOA wouldn't back down now. They had pride, money, and influence invested in this fight. And I had me, my land, and my resolve. Standing there, hands resting on the gate, I realized that tomorrow could change everything. The HOA would escalate. They might call law enforcement. They might send more lawyers, more threats, more intimidation. But whatever came next, I had made the first move. I had shown them that I wouldn't be broken, and deep down, I knew the biggest moment, the moment that would decide the real outcome, was just over the horizon. The morning air was sharp, biting at my skin as I stepped outside with Bandit at my heels. I could feel it, the tension in the neighborhood, thick and electric. Everyone knew today would be different. The word had spread like wildfire. The rancher was standing his ground, and the gate was now a symbol of defiance. By sunrise, I could see them approaching. A convoy of SUVs rolled down the road, more imposing than anything I had ever faced. Marjorie was in the lead car, her eyes locked on me like a predator sizing up its prey. Behind her, the board members followed and flanking. Then were lawyers, cameras, and even a local reporter. The drama they had hoped to suppress was about to go public. I took a deep breath, pressing my palms against the gate. Every muscle in my body was tense, but my mind was clear. Today, this fence, the symbol of their arrogance, would either break me or I would break it for them. The lead SUV came to a stop, the engine rumbling like a warning. Marjorie stepped out, sharp heels crunching against the gravel, her arms folded, her jaw tight. "Carter," she said, her voice trembling with fury and disbelief. "You've gone too far this time. You are threatening property rights, and you are creating chaos for the entire neighborhood. You will remove this toll, or we will escalate, legally, and otherwise." I didn't flinch. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not threatening property rights," I said, my voice firm. "I am enforcing mine. And as for chaos, maybe it's time someone reminded you who really owns what here." The SUV doors opened, and lawyers stepped forward, waving papers and muttering threats about injunctions and fines. One of them tried to grab the gate, to push it open, to assert their authority physically. That was the moment I realized. They had finally crossed the line. Bandit growled low in his throat, and I stepped forward. "Hands off," I warned. "This is my property. I will defend it." They paused, surprised, but Marjorie wasn't done. "Do you understand what you're doing? You could lose everything. Your land, your ranch, your business. One phone call, one signature, and all of this could be gone." I shook my head slowly. "You think I haven't considered that? You think I care about your threats more than my family's legacy? I've already lost sleep over this, already been humiliated enough. But I won't let you take my life from me. Not today, not ever." The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, though in reality it was mere minutes. Cars lined the detour route, watching, some honking, some silently cheering. Every neighbor was witnessing the confrontation, and the energy was palpable. Then, Marjorie did something I didn't expect. She stepped closer, pointing at me. "You think you're clever? You think you can humiliate us all and come out unscathed, but the board will not be mocked. Not by you. Not by anyone." I met her gaze, feeling the full weight of the moment. "I don't need to humiliate you," I said quietly, but with a fire that echoed through the air. "You've done that yourself. Every board meeting, every threat, every inch of this fence, it's your arrogance that's led us here." Suddenly, one of the board members tried to bypass the gate entirely, driving onto my property without permission. Bandit barked furiously, and I ran forward, stepping in front of the vehicle. The driver slammed the brakes, skidding slightly on the gravel. The tension snapped like a live wire. Marjorie froze, realizing her control was slipping. I could see it in her eyes, the first real fear she had shown since this all began. And then it happened. From the line of cars behind her, neighbors began to step forward, approaching the gate, showing solidarity in small gestures, paying tolls, giving thumbs up, some even recording the moment on their phones. It was a surge of support I hadn't anticipated, a quiet army of witnesses standing behind me, not against me. Marjorie's composure finally broke. She stormed back to her SUV, shouting orders, but the crowd's presence made it impossible for her to assert authority. I leaned against the gate, my chest heaving, adrenaline still pumping. The lawyers muttered under their breath. The cameras clicked, and the neighborhood had collectively realized that the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time since the fence went up, I felt a surge of vindication, but also exhaustion. This confrontation wasn't just physical or legal, it was emotional, spiritual, personal. I had faced the full weight of their collective arrogance and had refused to back down. And as the convoy finally began to retreat, I knew the aftermath would be intense. Marjorie would regroup, the HOA would plot, and there would be calls, letters, and meetings. But something fundamental had changed. They could no longer see me as someone to control. I had drawn a line, and no one, not Marjorie, not the board, not anyone, could erase it. I stood there, staring at the gate, at the line of cars waiting their turn, and I realized the truth. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I was no longer a victim. I was the one setting the terms, and that was a power no fence or no HOA could take away. The days after the showdown at the gate were surreal. The neighborhood seemed to buzz with whispers, glances, and muted admiration. For the first time, I felt the balance had shifted. The HOA wasn't gone, of course, they never were, but their aura of control had fractured, and I could feel it every time I walked past that fence. Every car that passed my toll gate reminded me that I had reclaimed more than just a road. I had reclaimed my voice, my pride, my land. I had prepared for resistance. I expected legal letters, angry board meetings, and calls from frustrated neighbors. And yes, some of that came, but not in the way I feared. Some neighbors quietly admitted to me that they had felt trapped under the HOA's rules for years, afraid to challenge them. Others thanked me personally, expressing relief that someone had finally stood up. I realized then that my fight hadn't just been for me. It had become a symbol for anyone who had ever been silenced. Marjorie didn't appear in person again, at least not immediately. I heard through the grapevine that she had called emergency meetings with lawyers and board members, frantically trying to regain control. But every attempt to pressure me legally stalled. My research, my documentation, and my calm resolve made it impossible to bully me into submission. I had anticipated their moves, and I had acted first, decisively. The toll itself became more than a revenue stream. It became a statement. Each payment was a small victory, a reminder that authority does not come from fear, but from fairness and respect. I even implemented a system to track every vehicle, ensuring transparency and legitimacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very gate they had built to humiliate me had become a symbol of accountability and order. Then came the moment that truly solidified everything. One afternoon, Marjorie sent a representative with an envelope. I took it cautiously, expecting threats or demands. Inside, however, were several signed agreements acknowledging my right to control access through my property, including a clause that protected the toll system I had set up. It was official. The HOA had been forced to recognize my authority. I sat on the porch, Bandit curled at my feet, staring at the fence in the sunlight. I couldn't help but smile at the sight. That wooden structure, once a symbol of oppression, had been transformed into a symbol of resilience. Every board member, every neighbor who had once sneered, had to recognize that I had drawn a line, and no one could cross it without consequence. More than the legal victory, though, the emotional weight of it settled over me like a warm blanket. For weeks I had carried anger, frustration, and humiliation, but now I felt something deeper. Peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I had stood for myself. I had faced intimidation, manipulation, and collective arrogance, and I had not faltered. I thought back to the first morning I walked outside and saw that fence looming over my driveway, a wall of boards and nails meant to trap me. I remembered the sinking feeling of helplessness, the frustration of detours, the sting of neighbors' judgment, and I realized something profound. None of that had been wasted. Every obstacle had forced me to think, to act, to claim what was mine, not just legally, but morally, emotionally, spiritually. Life returned to a kind of rhythm. Deliveries came and went without drama. Neighbors learned to respect the gate. And Marjorie faded into the background, her attempts at intimidation finally impotent. I could work, care for my animals, and enjoy my land without the constant weight of being undermined. The ranch felt like my sanctuary again, reclaimed not just physically, but emotionally. And yet I never took my victory for granted. That fence had taught me a lesson I would never forget. Power isn't about who shouts the loudest or controls the most rules. True power is standing firm in the face of opposition, thinking creatively when trapped, and knowing your own worth when everyone else tries to diminish it. Sometimes, in the evenings, I still walk down to the gate, watching the sunset stretch across my land. I see the long driveway, the fence, the line of cars waiting their turn. I see neighbors quietly smiling, sometimes nodding in acknowledgement, and I realize something simple but powerful. Freedom isn't given, it's taken. And once taken, it must be guarded fiercely, with courage, intelligence, and resolve. I brush my hands against the wood of the gate, feeling its weight, its texture, its presence. It isn't just a barrier anymore. It's a testament to resilience, to strategy, to the fact that I refuse to be pushed aside. And as I close my eyes, listening to the quiet hum of life around my ranch, I know one thing for certain. The fight had changed me, but it had also given me a gift far greater than any property dispute could offer. I had reclaimed my land. I had reclaimed my voice. And more importantly, I had reclaimed my life. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Without hesitation, knowing I had won, not just against the HOA, but for myself.